combining a passive solar greenhouse with the living area in one building can be tricky. Yeah, Rob and I have been talking a lot about this actually. I'm thinking of doing just that. Can you give me the most important aspects that need to be considered? Humidity control is probably one. The terrain is rather steep step of approximately 4 meters. Ground floor would be the greenhouse. Upstairs, somewhat staggered backwards into a slope, would be the living area. All three of you, thanks for the great stuff you're doing. That's funny because that's exactly what Rob and I have been talking about with my house that I want to build. And I've decided to not combine a greenhouse with the living space. And I just want to comment on this first, and then I'll leave this to Rob. But the reason I've decided to not do this, and it's because I have a passive solar greenhouse and have been operating one for many years. The problem is, and Rob might have more to add to this, but the problem that I've observed is that, and I don't do any of the data, like Rob is actually tracking the data and he does things like that, whereas I just go on my observation and I'm somewhat lazy with the data sometimes. But the problem with the passive solar greenhouse is that it stays warm more or less year round. Like I'm not heating mine at all this year. And we've been down to -10 Celsius so far. That greenhouse hasn't gone down below 5 degrees. So it's efficient, it stays warm. But the problem is you get pest problems, you get disease problems, and they don't go away. Now, do you want to have those in your house? I don't. I go in my greenhouse, my citrus is consistently problematic. My figs get a little bit of problems. I get some powdery mildew on my grapes. I don't want that stuff in my house. And so that's my main thinking. But what else would you add to that, Rob?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I've been into houses that have greenhouses on the south side of the building, and I can't be in the house because there's so much toxic mold in the building. And so you really do have to be cautious of the greenhouse. So I think if you take it back to base principles, like what is the main reason people want the greenhouse on their building? And it's because of this idea that Dakota mentioned earlier, this concept of needs and yields. And so how do we get the best yields out of a greenhouse that will benefit the house and the best yields out of the house that will benefit the greenhouse without compromising either of the two? And when we get into these higher performance buildings, inevitably we end up with various different ways of managing air in order to keep the air inside the house at a high quality. And so we can benefit, we can create a benefit in the greenhouse from the home by, for example, if you end up having an exhaust fan on your stove, typically that's exhausting air from the cooking process, which is 21 degrees Celsius and a high humidity, and we just dump that outside into the air. There may be an opportunity to harvest some of that heat and put that into your greenhouse if you do it in the right way. It's a little challenging. That was probably a bad example. A bathroom fan would be a better example of that. The reason cooking gases might not be good is because there can be entrained grease and things like that, which you may not want in your greenhouse. But a bathroom fan is totally fine. It's fine to send some farts out to the greenhouse. It'll probably benefit the plants anyways. And most of us would just dump that air outside. And so we're paying money to heat that air that we're then exhausting straight outside. That could go into a greenhouse pretty effectively. A clothing dryer, if you're going to use one of those, we don't have one in our house, but instead of just exhausting the air outside, you could create a benefit to your greenhouse by using that hot, humid air to keep the greenhouse warm while you're drying clothes. And so another one would be gray water. So if you're going to have a bath, especially in BC, gray water is totally legit. You can use that bath water, which is it's going to be warm. If you're using the right soaps, there's actually potentially going to be potassium in that soap if you're using like a Bronner style soap. And then that gray water can become an irrigation source. The reason that mold becomes an issue in greenhouses is that you've got plants transpiring. So as they suck water out of the soil and they photosynthesize, they put moisture into the air. And then as the greenhouse gets cold at night, if it's sharing a wall with that building, that building wall will get cold as well. And at some point when we reach, depending on the humidity in the air, once we reach what's called the dew point, and the dew point is something we're all familiar with because when it gets cold at night, right before, even in the middle of the summer, actually, it gets really cold at night and you wake up and everything's covered in water, even though it hasn't rained. And so what's happened there is that as the temperature of the air drops significantly enough, then water is no longer able to be held in a sponge. And so air is kind of like a sponge. The warmer it is, the more water it contains. As that temperature drops, its ability to hold water drops, and then water comes out in the form of dew. Now, if that dew point is reached inside of a building wall, so let's say your wall is made out of 2x4s, like most buildings in North America, and the wall itself reaches that dew point, and there's a high humidity in that insulation, that's when that moisture is going to drop out, and it's going to make those studs wet. And if you keep doing that over and over and over again, and if you build a house like most North Americans do with poly on both sides, or which traps the moisture inside, and that's a really bad way of building. A lot of the high performance houses now are doing what they call vapor open wall systems, which allow drying to occur on both sides. But if you've got a standard construction house that doesn't have a good drying capability in the wall, and you attach one of these greenhouses to it, and you end up having moisture falling out of the air, you're going to end up with toxic mold in that wall system. So I am going to attach a greenhouse to my home, specifically to show people how super hard it is and why they shouldn't do it. Because I keep getting asked the question, but it's going to be a small greenhouse, and we're going to go through all the different building science details that are required, so that if somebody is absolutely insistent on doing it, that they can come and actually touch, feel, and see what's actually required. Another really big issue that you have to think about, and I'll stop here, is that if you're going to put a greenhouse underneath the eave of a house, so let's say your greenhouse is right here and you've got your eave right here, that eave right there has something called soffit in it typically. And that soffit is going to allow air to move up into the attic space. And you can Google what a soffit is. If your greenhouse is releasing moisture out of the top of the peak and it goes into that soffit, you're going to get a whole bunch of condensation happening in your roof system. So needless to say, there's probably 50 other reasons not to do it. The point is that you have to be very cautious when you start combining different building styles that have different needs and yields. And it can seem like a really great idea on paper until you start the rubber hits the road. And then you can end up compromising probably the most expensive investment you ever make in your life, which is your home.
Exactly. But, there's sort of a happy medium there. And it's kind of what I've done at my place here, guys, is I've got my house isn't 100% connected to my greenhouse, but there's a roof structure connected to it. And I only have to walk 10 feet out of my back porch in a covered area into my greenhouse. And there's a door there. So, right. So I really do get the best of both worlds, because in the winter time, I can just stay in my underwear and bare feet and walk into my greenhouse and go pick some whatever. And I'm cold for 2 seconds. And so that way I keep it separated. And I really think if you want to do it, that's the way to do it. I having, 5 years with this greenhouse, it would be insane to compromise your home with that. I mean, like you said, you're going to put that much time, money, and resources into building a home. And then you're going to have this massive open-ended thing that's going to potentially cause all these problems. It's not worth it. Even if you thought about ways to mitigate those problems that you could put into the construction or the materials you use, you're going to spend so much money to do that. Why not just make a gateway somehow to get into it? And maybe there's a way to actually, I could technically enclose the area that I go into my greenhouse, but you guys have both been to my place many times, and just have 2 different doors, right? So the area can stay warm, but why take all those problems into your home? I don't think it would be worth it.